The night was quiet in the small outer colony. Most of the lights were off, the streets empty, and the cold wind howled between the metal houses. Ethan, a human living alone far from Earth, sat at his small table sipping lukewarm tea. He was used to loneliness. It had been his companion for years. Ever since he left his home planet, nothing ever changed here. Until that night, a sudden, hard knock shook his metal door. It wasn't the polite kind of knock a neighbor would give. It was desperate, fast. Almost like whoever was outside was afraid the door would never open. Ah! Ethan froze for a second, the cup in his hand trembling. Visitors at this hour usually meant trouble, but the knocking came again, louder. And this time he heard a faint voice, "Please open." He stood up and moved to the door, unlocking it slowly. When the door swung open, he saw her. An alien woman stood in the freezing wind, shivering violently, her clothes torn and dirty. Her skin had a pale bluish glow under the moonlight. Her hair tangled and her large golden eyes filled with fear. She clutched a small bag to her chest as if it was the only thing she had left in the world. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice low. She swallowed hard, then spoke in a shaky tone. "My husband. He left me here," she said. "Said I was dirty heritage, not worthy to be his wife." Her words made little sense to Ethan at first, but the pain in her eyes told the story clearly enough. She looked over her shoulder, scanning the empty street, as if expecting someone to drag her away. Ethan had heard about the alien caste system before. How some bloodlines were considered pure and others tainted. How people like her were treated like mistakes. He didn't care for such things. But he knew others did, and it could be dangerous. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. She hesitated, her lips trembling. I don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. Her voice was so small it almost disappeared in the wind. For a moment, Ethan thought about closing the door. Taking her in would mean trouble. The colony wasn't friendly to humans, and even less friendly to anyone who broke their social rules. But he couldn't ignore the way she was shaking, the way her eyes begged for even a little kindness. "Come inside," he said finally. Stepping back to let her in, she moved slowly, almost like she couldn't believe he had agreed the moment she crossed the threshold. She looked around nervously, her hand still clutching her bag. Ethan closed the door and turned up the small heater in the corner. "You can sit," he told her, pointing to the chair. She obeyed, but kept her back straight, like someone expecting to be scolded or thrown out. Up close, he noticed marks on her wrists, faint but clear, the kind left by metal cuffs. He said nothing about them, but inside, anger began to burn. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated again, as if even her name was dangerous. "Lyra," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded. "I'm Ethan." They sat in silence for a while. The only sound was the hum of the heater. Lyra kept glancing at the door, her shoulders tense. Ethan realized she was ready to run at any moment. "You're safe here," he told her. But she didn't answer. After a few minutes, he went to the kitchen and poured her some tea. She stared at it for a long time before taking a sip. Her hands were so cold, the cup shook in her grip. "You can stay," Ethan said quietly. "But there's something you should know about me." She looked up, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. "What?" she asked. Ethan leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I don't care about heritage. I don't care about alien laws, and I don't care who your husband is. What I do care about is that you don't end up freezing to death outside my door." For the first time, Lyra's expression softened. Just a little. She didn't thank him, but the way she relaxed in her chair told him enough. Outside, the wind howled louder, carrying the scent of danger. Inside, in the small warmth of Ethan's home, an unlikely bond had begun to form. Neither of them knew it yet. But this night would change both their lives forever. The heater's soft hum filled the small room. Wrapping the space in a thin layer of warmth, Lyra sat stiff in the chair. Her hands wrapped tightly around the cup, as though letting go might make the safety vanish. Ethan had seen war refugees before, but there was something different about her. It wasn't just fear, it was the deep exhaustion of someone who had been told too many times that she was worth nothing. "You can rest in there," Ethan said, pointing toward the small spare room he kept for storage. It wasn't much, just a narrow bed, a thin blanket, and an old dresser, but it was better than the freezing night outside. Lyra didn't move. At first, as if expecting him to change his mind. Finally, she stood, moving with slow, careful steps, her eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. "You think I'm going to throw you out in the middle of the night?" Ethan asked quietly. She didn't answer, only gripped the strap of her small bag tighter in the spare room. She placed her bag on the bed and sat at the edge, her back still straight. Ethan stood at the doorway for a moment, wanting to say something that would ease her mind, but words felt useless. Trust wasn't built with speeches, it was built with time. "I'll be in the next room if you need anything," he finally said, turning away. The first hour passed quietly. Ethan returned to his table. Sipping the now cold tea, he kept thinking about her, about why her husband had left her, about what dirty heritage really meant in this part of the galaxy. He didn't know the details, but he knew one thing: anyone who could abandon their wife at midnight in freezing weather was worth less than the dirt under his boots. A sudden cry shattered the silence. Ethan shot up from his chair, moving toward the spare room. Lyra was sitting up in bed, breathing hard, her eyes wide and wet with tears. "It's okay," Ethan said quickly, keeping his voice low and calm. She flinched at his presence, clutching the blanket like a shield. "Just a dream," she whispered, though her shaking told him it was more than that. He didn't step closer, not wanting to scare her. "You're safe here," he said again. "No one's going to hurt you." Her gaze flickered to his face, searching for any sign of a lie. She must have found none, because her breathing slowly began to steady. "Do you always help strangers?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Ethan gave a small shrug. "Only when they knock on my door at midnight," he said, trying for a hint of humor. For the first time, he saw the smallest trace of a smile on her lips. It vanished quickly, but it was there where I'm from, she said softly. "No one helps without wanting something in return." Ethan leaned against the doorway. "Then you're not where you're from anymore," he replied. Lyra lay back down, but she didn't close her eyes. Her gaze stayed on him for a long moment before she whispered, "Why would you help me?" He thought about it, but the answer was simple. "Because you needed it," he said. The rest of the night was a quiet mix of half-sleep and restless thoughts. Ethan stayed awake longer than he needed, listening for any sound outside. He knew the colony could be cruel if word spread that she was in his home. There might be consequences, but when he thought of sending her away, he remembered the look in her eyes when she stood at his door. No, he wouldn't throw her back into the cold in the early hours of the morning. He heard the faint sound of movement. Peeking into the spare room, he saw Lyra sitting on the bed, clutching a small piece of cloth. It looked like part of a child's blanket. Worn and frayed, she saw him looking and quickly hid it in her bag. Ethan didn't ask. Whatever memory it carried was clearly painful as the first dim light of dawn touched the colony. Lyra stood in the doorway of the main room. Her posture was less rigid now, though her eyes still carried that guarded look. "I'll go before people see me," she said quietly. Ethan set down his mug. "You can try," he said, "but it's cold, and you've nowhere to go, and you know it." She bit her lip, looking away. "You'll get in trouble for me," she said. Ethan's voice was steady. "I've been in trouble before," for a long moment. They stood in silence. Outside, the streets were waking faint footsteps. A market stall creaking open. The hum of small machines, inside, a fragile choice hung between them. Lyra's eyes lifted to meet his. "I'll stay," she whispered, as if saying it too loud might break the moment. Ethan nodded once. "Good," he said. "Then let's make you some breakfast." It wasn't much, a small plate of bread and warm tea, but the way she looked at it, as if it was the first real meal in a long time, told him he'd done the right thing. The first night had passed, and whether they realized it or not, it had marked the start of something neither of them could have predicted. By the next morning, the colony was already buzzing with life. Metal shutters clanged open, shopkeepers called out prices, and the smell of sizzling alien spices filled the air. Ethan rarely went into the market unless he needed supplies, but that day he knew he couldn't avoid it. Lyra needed clothes that weren't torn and food that would last more than a day. She stood at the doorway of his small home, wrapped in a blanket like it was armor. "You don't have to come with me," Ethan said. "I can get what you need," but she shook her head slowly. "If I hide, they'll think I'm afraid." She whispered, "I've hidden enough." The market was only a short walk away, but every step felt like crossing open ground under a sniper's scope. Ethan noticed the stares first, the slow, lingering looks from shopkeepers, the half-hidden gestures as people whispered behind their hands when they passed a fruit stall. The merchant's smile froze the moment he saw Lyra. His eyes flicked from her to Ethan, then back again, sharp with disapproval. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. The message was clear. She's not welcome here, and neither are you if you're with her. At the fabric stall, the seller didn't even bother to hide his contempt. "No service," he said. Bluntly turning away, Ethan frowned. "Is your stock only for a certain kind of customer?" The alien man didn't answer, only waved him off, muttering in his own language. Lyra touched Ethan's arm lightly. "It's fine," she said, but her voice was flat, lifeless. Like she had said those words too many times in her life. They managed to buy some supplies from a human-run shop, but even there, the owner asked too many questions. "Where'd you find her?" he asked, lowering his voice. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's staying with me." The man raised his brows. "Careful, friend. You know the rules here. Mixed blood brings mixed trouble." On the way back, 3 young alien men stepped into their path. Their uniforms were casual, but marked with the colors of one of the local clans. "Well, look at this," the tallest one sneered. The human found himself a pet. Ethan's fists tightened at his sides, but he kept his voice even move. The shortest of the 3 grinned and leaned close to Lyra. "What's wrong? Husband finally threw you out. Or did you crawl to him because you know humans are desperate?" Lyra's face went pale, but she didn't step back. Ethan moved between them, his tone sharp now. "Walk away." The leader laughed. "Or what? You'll fight us for her." Ethan's eyes were cold. "If I have to." The tension hung in the air for a moment, until a passing patrol caught sight of them and the young men finally stepped aside, muttering curses, but as they walked away, one called over his shoulder, "Stay with him, and you'll end up dead too." Lyra didn't speak for the rest of the walk home. Inside, she sat at the small table, staring at the wall there. "Right," she said finally, being near. "Me will only bring you trouble." Ethan sat down across from her. "I don't care," he said simply. She shook her head. "You should, Ethan. My husband has connections here. He has power. And if he finds out I'm with you, then he'll find out I'm not." Afraid of him, Ethan interrupted. Her eyes softened for just a second, but the worry didn't leave. "I can work," she said quickly. "I can clean. I can cook. I can help with repairs. You don't have to feed me for nothing." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I didn't take you in for labor, Lyra. I took you in because no one deserves to be thrown away like garbage." There was a long silence before she spoke again, her voice low. "I've never met someone who said that to me before." That night, Ethan double-checked the locks on the door. He could feel the shift in the air. The market stares, the insults, the threats, they were only the beginning. As he set his small blaster on the table beside his bed, he thought about the look in Lyra's eyes. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was something close to hope. Outside, the streets were quiet again. But in the shadows, the whispers spread. The human is sheltering her. The human is protecting the dirty heritage woman. By morning, everyone would know. And trouble would come looking. The next few days passed with a strange mix of quiet and tension. Ethan and Lyra fell into a simple routine. He would go out, for work or supplies, and she would keep the small home in order. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried the weight of someone who measured every sentence, afraid the wrong one might cost her safety. One evening, as Ethan returned from repairing a cargo loader at the docks, he noticed something strange. A folded piece of dark paper was wedged into the corner of his door. It wasn't the kind of paper anyone in the colony used for casual messages. He pulled it free and unfolded it. The words were written in jagged alien script, but Ethan had learned enough of the language to read it. Give her back or pay the price. Ethan's jaw tightened as he crumpled the paper in his fist. He stepped inside and found Lyra in the kitchen area. Boiling water for tea, she looked up at him, sensing something in his expression. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He placed the crumpled note on the table. Her eyes widened the moment she saw the writing. "It's him," she whispered. Her hands gripping the edge of the counter, Ethan knew who she meant without asking. "Your husband?" She nodded slowly. "He's not just any man, Ethan. He's from the Vorik bloodline," she explained. "They're one of the oldest and most powerful clans on this planet. They decide which families rise and which ones are erased." Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So why did he marry you if he thought you were what he called you?" Lyra's eyes lowered. It wasn't his choice. It was arranged by his father. "To strengthen ties with my mother's family, but when it was discovered that my mother's bloodline wasn't pure, I became ashamed to him." Her voice trembled, but she kept speaking. "He beat me, locked me away, told everyone I was worthless, and when the scandal got too loud, he threw me out, thinking no one would take me." Ethan listened in silence, his anger building with every word. When she finally looked at him, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Fear, not just of her husband, but of what would happen to Ethan if he defied the man. "You should let me go before they come for me," she said. "No," Ethan replied simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. That night, he set a small table in the corner and placed an old human device on it, a compact unit. It was something he'd kept from his days working as a technician for the Frontier Patrol. He handed her a small transmitter linked to it. "If anything happens, if someone comes to the door or tries to follow you, press this button, it'll send me a signal." Lyra stared at the device like it was a strange relic. "No one's ever given me something to call for help before," she murmured. Ethan gave a faint smile. Then maybe it's time someone did. The next morning, he began teaching her basic self-defense. They moved the small table and chairs aside to make space. At first, she was stiff and awkward, unused to fighting back, but Ethan was patient, showing her how to block, how to twist free from a grip, and where to strike if she was cornered. Her hands trembled at first, but with each attempt, she grew steadier. There was even a brief moment where she smiled, a real unguarded smile, when she managed to surprise him with a quick move. But the shadow of her past wasn't far behind. That evening, as the two sat quietly over dinner, there was a sudden loud thunk against the door. Ethan grabbed his small blaster and moved to check. When he opened it, no one was there. Only another piece of folded paper on the ground. This one was shorter, more direct. "Tomorrow." He turned back inside, his expression grim. Lyra saw it and her face went pale. "He's coming himself," she said in a whisper. Ethan set the note on the table. Then he'll find I'm not the kind of human who runs. Lyra wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his eyes. It was the same kind of look her husband had when he was about to hurt someone. But with Ethan, it was different. His anger wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at protecting her, and that, more than anything, scared her, because she knew men like her husband didn't just walk away when they lost. They destroyed what they couldn't control. Outside, the streets grew quieter as night fell. Somewhere in the distance, an engine roared, the kind of deep, heavy sound that belonged to high-status ships. The sound faded, but it left a weight. In the air, they both knew what it meant. Tomorrow wouldn't be just another day. It would be the day her past caught up to them. The colony streets were silent when darkness fell. Shops had shut early, as if the whole place knew something was coming. Inside Ethan's home, the air was heavy. Lyra sat near the small heater, staring into the faint orange glow as if it could give her courage. Ethan checked the locks one more time, then placed his blaster on the table within arm's reach. Neither of them spoke much. The note left at the door tomorrow was burned into both their minds. But tomorrow had a way of arriving sooner than expected. It started with a faint scraping sound outside. Ethan froze mid-step, head tilting slightly. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the usual creak of metal panels shifting in the cold. It was deliberate. He moved to the door quietly, signaling Lyra to stay back. The sound came again, this time followed by the muffled thud of footsteps. Ethan's hand rested on the blaster grip. Then, without warning, the door rattled violently. Someone was trying to force it open. Lyra gasped and took a step back, her hands clutching the blanket around her. Ethan motioned for her to move toward the storage room. "Stay there, no matter what," he whispered. The door's lock groaned under pressure, and then, with a sharp metallic snap, it gave way. 3 alien men stormed inside, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. They were dressed in dark combat leathers, the kind used by hired enforcers. The leader's voice was deep and cold. "Step aside, human. We're here for what doesn't belong to you." Ethan raised the blaster. "She's not leaving with you," he said, his tone flat. The leader smiled faintly. "That's not your choice." The first attacker lunged, but Ethan fired the shot, hitting the man's shoulder and sending him crashing into the wall. The other 2 moved fast, one grabbing a metal pipe from the corner and swinging at Ethan's head. Ethan ducked, slamming his elbow into the man's ribs. The third attacker tried to push past toward the storage room, but Lyra's voice rang out from the shadows. "Leave him alone." She had grabbed the small kitchen blade Ethan used for cooking. Her hands shook, but she held it between herself and the intruder. The man laughed. Brave for someone so weak. He sneered, reaching for her arm, but before he could touch her, Ethan tackled him from behind. The 2 crashed into the small table, sending the blaster skidding across the floor. One of the attackers staggered to his feet and grabbed Ethan by the collar, slamming him into the wall. Pain shot through Ethan's ribs, but he pushed back hard, landing a solid punch to the alien's jaw. The man stumbled, dazed. Ethan snatched up the blaster and aimed it again. "This is your only warning. Get out." The leader, nursing a cut on his cheek, stared at him with cold fury. "You've just made yourself a target, human," he said. Then, with a sharp gesture, he signaled the others to retreat. They backed toward the door, but not before the leader added, "Tomorrow night will be different." The moment they were gone, Ethan locked the door again, his breathing heavy. Lyra dropped the knife onto the table, her hands trembling. "You're hurt," she said. Moving toward him, Ethan glanced at the blood on his knuckles and the bruise forming on his side. "I've been worse," he said with a faint grin, though his voice was tight with pain. She fetched a small cloth and warm water. tending to the cuts on his arms. "You shouldn't have to do this for me," she whispered. Ethan met her gaze. "I told you I won't let them take you." Her golden eyes shimmered, and she looked away quickly. "I'm scared, Ethan. Not just of him, but of losing you too." He paused, the words sinking in for someone like Lyra. Admitting fear was dangerous. It gave people weapons to use against you. But she wasn't saying it to give him a weapon. She was saying it because, for the first time, she felt she could. The rest of the night passed without more attacks, but neither of them slept. Ethan sat near the door, blaster in hand, while Lyra sat across from him, wrapped in her blanket. Every now and then, their eyes met in the quiet. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Outside, the colony slept, unaware or unwilling to care about what had happened. But somewhere in the darkness, her ex-husband would be hearing that his first attempt had failed. And men like him didn't take failure lightly. By dawn, Ethan knew one thing for certain. The next time they came, it wouldn't be just 3 men. And it wouldn't be for intimidation. It would be for the final claim. He tightened his grip on the blaster and glanced at Lyra. If they wanted her, they would have to go through him, no matter the cost. By midday. The tension in the air felt heavier than the colony's gravity. The attack from the night before had left the house in disarray. A broken chair, scuff marks on the wall, and the faint metallic scent of burned blaster shots. Ethan had cleaned what he could, but the damage wasn't just to the room. It was to the quiet safety they'd tried to build. Lyra hadn't said much all morning. She moved through the small space like a shadow, her mind far away. Ethan noticed how often she paused to glance at the window, as if expecting someone to be standing there. And then, in the early afternoon, the sound came. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't pounding. It was a single, heavy thud, a hand slamming once against the door. A signal, not a request. Ethan's hand went to his blaster. When he opened the door, the man standing there made the entire street seem to shrink. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing fine black armor with gold trim, and eyes sharp as broken glass. This was no hired thug. This was Lyra's husband. Behind him stood 4 guards in matching armor. The husband's gaze swept past Ethan and landed on Lyra, who had frozen in the middle of the room, his lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "So it's true," he said, his voice smooth but dripping with contempt. The little heritage mistake found herself a human to hide behind. Ethan stepped into his line of sight, blocking his view of her. "You came all this way to insult your own wife?" he said evenly. The man's expression hardened. "She is not my wife, human. She is property I cast aside, and I've come to take back what is mine." Lyra's voice cracked through the tense air. "I'm not yours," she said, her hands trembling but her chin lifted. Her husband's eyes narrowed like the words were a personal attack. "You think your choice matters? The council's laws say otherwise." He reached into his armor and pulled out a folded document sealed with the Varric clan's emblem. "This makes it official," he said, holding it up. "You belong to me until I release you, Ethan." Didn't look at the paper. "She's not going anywhere," he said, his voice like stone. The husband gave a low laugh. "You're a fool, human. I could end you here and no one would care." Ethan's eyes didn't waver. "You could. Try." One of the guards stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his blade. Lyra took a step toward Ethan, her voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I choose him," she said. "I will not go with you." Her husband froze for a moment, as if the words hadn't registered. Then his face twisted into something far darker. "You dare say that in public?" he hissed. Ethan realized the importance of her statement. She hadn't just defied him, she had done it openly, in front of witnesses, in their society. Public declarations couldn't be ignored. A few nearby neighbors had stopped to watch. Whispers spread quickly. This wasn't just a personal matter anymore, it was a public challenge. and public challenges meant the council might be forced to get involved. The husband's jaw tightened. "Fine," he said coldly. "If you want to make this public, then we'll settle it in the council chamber tomorrow." He turned sharply and signaled his guards, but before he left, he leaned close to Ethan, his voice low and venomous. "She will stand beside me when this is done, and you will be nothing but another human buried in alien soil." When they were gone, Lyra sank into the nearest chair, her legs shaking. "You know what you've done?" she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I've made sure he can't just drag you away." She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "The council, they follow the bloodlines. Ethan, they don't care about people like me." Ethan knelt beside her, resting a steady hand on the arm of the chair. "Then tomorrow, we give them a reason to care," he said. That night, the house felt smaller. They spoke little. Saving their strength for what was coming, Lyra sat by the heater again, her gaze fixed on the flickering light. Ethan cleaned his blaster one last time, though he knew weapons wouldn't help much. In a council hearing outside, the colony moved on with its usual rhythm. But in the shadows, everyone was talking about what would happen tomorrow. Some bet that the human would be gone before the week ended. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of story the council wouldn't be able to bury. By the time the night deepened, Ethan was certain of one thing: the confrontation wasn't over. Tomorrow, it would be decided whether Lyra stayed free or was dragged back into the nightmare she had escaped, and if the council tried to force her hand, they'd have to face him first. The council chamber stood at the heart of the colony, a towering structure of black stone and silver pillars. Its high arched doors opened into a wide hall where voices echoed against the cold walls. By the time Ethan and Lyra arrived, the place was already crowded. Council hearings were usually dull, but not when they involved a public challenge from a powerful clan and a human outsider. Lyra walked beside Ethan, her steps small but steady. She wore a plain cloak he had bought from a trader who didn't ask questions. Her golden eyes scanned the crowd, catching whispers and stares. Some were filled with curiosity, others with open hostility. Ethan kept his gaze forward, every step measured. At the center of the chamber sat the Council 7. Alien elders draped in ceremonial robes. They were the ones who decided disputes, enforced laws, and, in practice, protected the interests of the elite. Directly in front of them stood Lyra's husband, his fine armor polished to a shine. He looked as if he had already won. "Let us begin," said the lead elder, his voice deep and formal. "This is a matter of contested claim. The Varric clan asserts ownership of Lyra, daughter of Saren, on the basis of documented union." He gestured for Lyra's husband to speak. The man stepped forward confidently. "She is mine by the law of our people," he said, his tone smooth. "Her bloodline may be tainted, but the union was sanctioned. She remains bound to me until I release her, which I have not." He held up the sealed document, the one he had shown Ethan the day before. "This is the proof." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The elders examined the seal and nodded slightly. One of them turned to Lyra. "What is your response to this claim?" Lyra's hands trembled, but she stepped forward. "My response is that I am not property," she said, her voice low but clear. "I was beaten, locked away, humiliated, not treated as a wife, but as a burden. And when it suited him, I was thrown out like waste." Her husband's expression darkened. "Lies," he snapped. "She was provided for. Her ungrateful nature makes her twist the truth." Ethan took a step forward. "With respect, counsel," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know your laws, but I know what's right. A person is not a thing you own, and any law that says otherwise is wrong." The elders frowned slightly. "You are not of our people, human," one of them said. Your customs do not decide our judgments. Maybe not, Ethan replied. But you called this a public matter, so let the public hear the truth. The lead elder gestured for him to continue. Ethan took a breath. She came to my door in the middle of the night, dandined in the cold, with nothing but the clothes. On her back, she was afraid to even say her own name. I saw the marks on her wrists, the fear in her eyes. And I decided no one was going to hurt her again. He looked toward Lyra, and for a moment, the chamber's noise faded. She's not asking for my protection, she's asking for the right to choose where she belongs. One of the elders looked toward Lyra. Do you choose the human? He asked. Her voice was quiet but firm. Yes. The crowd reacted instantly. Some gasped. Some muttered angrily. Others looked surprised. Her husband's face turned red with rage. This is an insult to my bloodline, to our traditions. He shouted, you dishonor yourself by letting a human steal what is mine. The lead elder raised his hand for silence. We have heard enough, he said. We will decide now. The council members leaned toward each other, speaking in low voices. Ethan stood perfectly still, but inside, every second felt like a blade pressed against his chest. He knew they could side with her husband easily. The laws were on his side. But the public nature of the hearing, the witnesses, and Lyra's open declaration had made it harder for them to ignore. Finally, the lead elder turned back to the chamber. The council rules that Lyra, daughter of Saren, is released from the union. She is free to choose her own path. The chamber erupted in noise. Lyra's husband shouted something, but the guards moved to block him from approaching. Ethan stepped to Lyra's side as she took a deep, trembling breath. You're free, he said softly. They walked out of the chamber together, the crowd's voices fading behind them. Outside, the cold air hit their faces, but it felt different now. Lyra stopped in the street and looked at him, her eyes shimmering now. Can I stay in your bed without fear? She asked, her lips curving into the smallest smile. Ethan smiled back. You can stay as long as you want. They walked toward the edge of the colony, side by side, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two people who had fought for the same thing, the right to choose. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning.